Today we are testing two 35mm lenses. I've got the R5 Mark II. I have two of them, so this will be a proper test. And here on my right, I have the new RF 35mm 1.4 VCM. And then here on my left, I have the EF 35mm version 2, and I'm adapting this with the Canon mount adapter to the R5 Mark II. We're going to shoot these with the same settings, and we're going to take a look at the results and sort of compare what these two lenses will get you in terms of sharpness, contrast, and all those things. We'll also compare the video's performance of both these lenses. So Dune is going to model for us today. We're going to take a few portraits to compare these lenses. So we'll start here. All right, and I'm gonna shoot these at f1.4. That's beautiful. I'm gonna get the same settings here on my other camera, 1250 1.4. Look at me. Beautiful. I'm gonna come in a little bit. And looking to the side. And back to me, and to the side. Cool, and now I'll just do like a little bit of video here. Shall we find a new spot? Now I want to just test the flaring of the lenses and see if there's any sort of notable differences in that department. All right. Come more to the side angle here. Ooh, that's pretty. I am noticing a pretty big difference here. It actually seems like the older lens might have more interesting flare, more beautiful flare, but we'll see. I'm gonna do some video here as well. Okay, so here we go with another test. We're gonna shoot kind of brighter sun. And for this, I'm gonna close the aperture slightly to 3.2 so we can see the sharpness at a more closed aperture. 3.2 is kind of where I like to sit for a majority of the time if I'm not shooting wide open. I just think it has a really good look. It's really sharp, but also has some good separation. So can you kind of look towards the sun for these? 3.2. Turn your body a little more towards the sun. Yeah, that's nice. You can just keep your eyes closed. Pretty, stay like that. That's great. So one of the things I'm noticing as I shoot is there is not a huge difference between the autofocus capabilities of these two lenses, but when you compare them side by side, the new 35 definitely feels snappier, faster. You don't hear it or feel it as much. Feels like there's a lot of moving parts in this lens, whereas this lens is sort of just instant, like razor fast, blazing fast, and you barely even notice anything happening in the lens. So pretty cool. And again, this combination is so light and compact versus this combination, so really interesting to compare them side by side. Okay, so this has been a pretty fun test between these two lenses. We're gonna take the images that we just made and look at them on the computer and sort of discuss the findings. But overall, they're two 1.4 35mm L lenses. So either way, you're getting a similar result, but each has its own benefits, I would say. The older lens feels more sturdy, it's bigger, it's heavier, it has a really nice lens flare. It still is fast focusing lens, even though it's quite a bit older than this one. This one is light and small and really fast, and it's made for video. It has this extra ring here where you can control your aperture in video, and you can control the aperture in still photography on the newer cameras like the R5 Mark II, which is a cool feature. It also has a programmable button here on the lens, which is also a new feature over the older lens. So you get a few new features with this lens in addition to the saving size and weight. Oh, you also get this control ring, which is on all of Canon's RF lenses, that I don't really use much, but it's there. So let's take a look at the images on the computer and see what we find. Okay, so I'm in my office now, and I was able to look at these photos last night and edit a few of them and sort of gather my thoughts about them. And I'm really excited to share what I found with you guys because it's really interesting to me, and I know it's going to be interesting to you too. One thing I also wanted to just get across right off the bat is that 35mm is not a favorite focal length of mine. I keep trying to make it a staple in my bag, but it just isn't a lens for me that has really grabbed me. I feel like I'm coming to this without knowing much about the performance of the EF 35 or the RF 35. I haven't spent a ton of time using either of them, so this is a really interesting test for me to see really how do these lenses compare without coming to it from any sort of biased position, or I guess less biased than it would have been if I had used any one of these lenses and loved them for any particular length of time. So basically my findings are that there are clear trade-offs between the two lenses. We're going to go into Lightroom and look at the example images, and that will be the most telling, I think. But here's just a quick summary. The RF 35 1.4 is a new design. It has a much quieter, faster focusing mechanism. It's more fine-tuned for videography, and it also captures high-quality stills. It's very sharp. I like the size, weight, and how compact it is. I like that it's a native RF lens. I like that it's an f1.4. It has a lot going for it. The EF version is sturdier, it's bigger, it's heavier, it seems like it's maybe a little bit more well built. I don't know if that's actually true, but it feels that way in the hands. Overall, much better image quality than the RF 1.4. This is something that's been talked about a lot already on the internet, and we're going to see it in a minute. But the RF version, unfortunately, creates quite a bit of distortion in the images, which is not true for the EF version. Sharpness across the board is very similar, and even autofocus performance I found to be quite similar, although the RF definitely has an edge, particularly in video. Let's dive into Lightroom and we can talk more about the specifics. All right, so we have our catalog here with our example images. I basically colored these to keep it simple for us. So the images that are color-coded in blue were shot with the RF 35 1.4, and the images that are coded in red were shot with the EF 35 1.4. You can see that down here in the metadata, which it's true for all of these images. RF are blue, EF are red. So I've edited these images. I showed you some examples earlier of the raw images and the edited images, but for the sake of this video, I'm gonna reset all of these images. Just gonna reset the develop settings. So we come into this, seeing what we get straight out of camera. Now, something to note is that we are using the Adobe Color profile. So these are the raw images right out of my camera as they appear when I open them in Lightroom. So here are the first two images, which we can compare side by side. So we can see here the color coding. So blue for the RF, red for the EF. So RF in this case on the left, EF on the right. And to be honest, I don't see much of a difference at all in either of these images in quality or color. If we go ahead and open these up in the develop module, this is the RF image zoom in, you can see it's quite sharp, good color, good sharpness, great separation. These are shot at f1.4. Here are the settings up in the top right-hand corner. Here is the EF version. So same settings as you can see in the top right-hand corner, f1.4, and it looks quite similar. It's sharp, beautiful color, good separation. Let's go back to the previous image and now to the EF, RF, EF, RF, EF. So to be quite honest, it's pretty hard to tell a difference. Now here's where we're gonna see a big difference. So we go into our lens corrections. We can see here, Canon RF35 1.4 VCM. Let's disable profile corrections and see what happens. So this is the problem that a lot of people online have been talking about. Major vignetting and distortion when the image is not corrected with lens corrections. And for me, I wasn't really sure how this would actually impact image making, if it would have an impact at all, because as we saw looking at these photos originally, they look almost identical. You can't tell a difference. Even if you zoom in, you can't tell a difference when the lens corrections are applied. So does this actually make a difference in practice? I think that's the question. So just to show you, this is where it really was apparent to me how different these two lenses are. If we look at the EF lens and we turn the profile corrections off, there's almost no distortion on this lens. What we're seeing here is a vignetting that is corrected with profile corrections, but there's no lens distortion, hardly any at all to speak of. In contrast, with the RF lens, we can see how much the edges are distorted when we turn off profile corrections. I'm just going to show this to you again. So profile corrections off. This is the EF lens. You can see the slight distortion in the corners, but definitely more slight than the RF version. And here's the RF version, much more intense distortion in the corners. So this is what people are mad about from this new lens, is that Canon shipped a lens that effectively relies on profile corrections in editing software to make the images look how they're supposed to look, rather than shipping a lens that will do that for us. The thing is though, in both cases, you would probably want to apply profile corrections. You probably want to do that to any lens you're working with to correct any vignetting or distortion. I know a lot of folks were really upset with the distortion from the new RF lens, but it's probably a trade-off for the size and weight. Now, you have to understand that I think what Canon is trying to do is create a series of voice coil motor lenses that are all the same size and weight. And I think the trade-off in creating this trio or this group of lenses is distortion. It's not a perfect lens by any means. The image quality is compromised. And this is disappointing for me because as a creator, after seeing this comparison, I lose confidence in the RF35 when I compare it to the EF35. It doesn't feel good to shoot with the RF version knowing that it has sort of lesser image quality than the EF version. But I think we have to ask ourselves, okay, do the pros outweigh the cons? Is it worth it to have a larger, heavier lens that I have to adapt that might focus slightly slower? Or is it worth it to have a small, light, compact, natively RF mount lens that is a new technology and created for my new mirrorless camera? Which one is better? I don't really know the answer, to be honest with you. I wish that I could tell you the RF version had impeccable image quality. I really do feel like the EF version is an incredibly solid lens. It's beautiful, well built, has really amazing image quality. To be honest with you, if I were just selecting between the two of these lenses, I might have to go with the EF version for the image quality. If I were shooting video, I would definitely go with the RF version. for me, I think it would come down to, am I shooting stills or am I shooting video? Let's take a look at another example here. Here's a tighter portrait. So as we can see, looking at them side by side, there's not much of a difference here, if any. We notice maybe a slight shift in skin tone on the right, shifts maybe slightly more green, the left slightly more magenta, but overall they look very, very similar. Slight color differences, but the overall quality looks very similar. Same with the overall sharpness. So let's go ahead and zoom in and take a closer look. This is the RF lens. This is the EF lens. RF, EF, RF, EF. It's really hard to tell a difference in sharpness, in an overall quality and separation. If anything, the bokeh of the EF is slightly smoother. If we look here at the background, we can zoom in there. This is the RF, EF, RF, EF. So the EF is slightly smoother, slightly more pleasing, but it's really only noticeable if you're looking for it. And I would say that the sharpness is pretty indistinguishable. I think that the RF is sharper than the EF. Let's take a look at the corner sharpness here. Of course, this is out of focus, but here is EF, RF, EF, RF, EF. That's not really very helpful. But here, let's take a look again at our profile corrections here. So if we disable profile corrections on the RF version, we can see this really drastic change. And look at the corners and what happens to the corners here. I'm going to zoom in so we can see this. It really changes the image quite a bit. There's this whole section of the image that is lost. And then if we look at the EF lens, it's much more slight. It's much less noticeable. Okay, so hopefully this is a useful test. You've seen several example images now. We've talked a lot about it. It's almost a toss-up for me. I think for my use case, I would probably choose one lens for video and one lens for stills. I think that the EF lens is a better option for still photography. It just produces a better image than the RF, but I'm conflicted because I really do appreciate the size and weight and sharpness, that compact form factor, and the fact that the new 35 is RF mount and I don't need an adapter. It's hard for me to decide between these two lenses. The last thing I want to talk about before we finish this video is the pricing, which is really interesting. So the EF35 f1.4 II is still available to purchase new, and the price is usually $19.99 US, whereas the RF 35 1.4 L VCM is priced at $14.99 US. So that's almost $500 difference, where the EF is more expensive than the RF, which is interesting. They're sort of pricing the EF above the RF. Right now you could get it at a slightly lower price new, but the thing about the EF is you can also buy it used. So on KEH, here's a copy, Excellent Plus, available with the caps and hood for $960. So you can effectively get the best quality 35mm lens for under $1,000 because this lens is available and has been for a while and is plentiful in the used market. So this is really interesting that Canon is pricing the EF version significantly higher than the RF version. It's almost like they know that they're offering a more premium product with the EF version than the RF version, which is frustrating when we have RF mount cameras and no quality 35mm lens. Even though I don't want to discredit the RF 35, it is a good lens. It's not equivalent to the EF 35. So anyway, a lot of talk, a lot of discussion here, but I hope that this video has been helpful for you. Please let me know your thoughts. I'm so curious to know what you guys think about these two lenses and which one you would use in which situations. Please leave your comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this video, if it was helpful for you, please give it a like. Thank you for watching. See you soon.